The eighth jhana, neither perception nor non-perception. If meditators wish to attain the eighth jhana, they can simply hang out in nothingness until they get bored with perception entirely and understand that even the profoundly subtle perception that is nothingness is subtly disconcerting or dissatisfying. Thus, the mind will eventually shift on its own to the state with the perplexing but thoroughly appropriate title of neither perception nor non-perception, hereafter the eighth jhana, or J8, for the sake of brevity. This state is largely incomprehensible. There is no reasonable way to attempt to describe it, save that it is a mind state. I am tempted to say that in it we are simultaneously focused so narrowly that we notice nothing, and yet so broadly focused that we don't notice even that, but such a description doesn't do the state justice. Another way I sometimes think of this state is like what happens when you turn off an old, tube-driven black and white television when the screen goes blank, and just before it shuts off, there is this tiny pale dot in the middle of the screen. It's like what happens just at the moment that the dot is right on the edge of being totally gone, as if you froze in time that edge right between the dot being there and not being there, and had it apply to everything in your whole sensate world. One way or another, there is complete inattention to diversity, or divestment from attention to multiplicity, however you wish to think of it. The eighth jhana is the highest of the standard ordinary states of concentration that can be attained, ignoring the attainment of nirodha samapatti, also known as the cessation of perception and feeling, and some of the more unusual jhanic goodies detailed later. This state is contrasted with the first 7 jhanas in that it is not possible to investigate this state because it is too incomprehensible. Thus, there is no VJ8, just J8. Thus, as this state ends, the meditator may return to lower states or turn to insight practice in the afterglow of this state. In contrast to the previous 7 jhanas, the issue of hard or soft jhana that relate to how solidly one is in a state does not apply to the eighth jhana. You are either in it or you are not. Just as with nothingness and due to its profundity, it is also a very common mimic for some higher attainments, leaving people confused and possibly overcalling their attainments when they confuse it for something more profound, and it can become one more of the golden chains. It is also on the standard list of unknowing events, and sorting out this from the other unknowing events on the list requires a sophisticated meditative palate and solid phenomenological competence. The eighth jhana may have a certain stability that nothingness doesn't due to the inability to make sense of it. Thus, the mind may move fairly quickly from boundless consciousness through nothingness and drop into the eighth jhana for a while, though the vaguest hint of attention to anything specific demolishes the state instantly. It is also possible to sort of drift up and down through the various formless realms, and downshifting to lower jhanas after being in higher jhanas such as this one can lend a great deal of intensity to them. While I recommend the traditional way to attain the formless realms, cultivating each one, then after mastering it, attempting to get to the next, that is not how I attained to them the first time. I was on a retreat, and my momentary concentration had gotten quite strong through doing insight practices, and having gotten what I was gunning for on that retreat, I finally decided to take a break and see what the jhanas were about. I simply made a resolution for the jhanas to arise, inclined my mind in the direction of the smooth and peaceful, and stayed with what happened, and jhanas 1 through 8 showed up over about 45 minutes. This is not the typical path by which people attain them, but it is worth mentioning in order to make a general point, which is that if you get your concentration strong by any method, including momentary concentration, just inclining to the shamatha jhanas might be enough for them to occur. The flip side of this is that if your concentration is not strong, no matter how hard you try, not much will likely happen. So, if you are having a hard time getting into jhanas, set yourself up to succeed, meaning, give yourself some high-quality protected time. Pick a technique you really enjoy that has a demonstrated track record of producing strong concentration states, such as the standard kasina practices, of which a candle flame is my favorite. I have also used blue, red, and white discs, and even large filled-in circles and other images such as stars with circles around them on my computer screen. Again, refer to works such as Bhante Gunaratana's writings, or the Vimudimagga or Visuddhimagga, and practice all day long, every day for a week or 3 or longer. It is amazing what that sort of momentum will produce, and it can open whole worlds of access that you never dreamed existed and might not have been able to reach, or reach to that degree of depth, and with that facility, had you not done this. The works of Venerable Pa Auk Sayadaw are also very worth checking out, as his tradition prides itself on very strong jhana practice. Finally, I should add that there is something I call the post-8th junction point, P8JP, which is the state of mind created when we have just been in the 8th jhana, left it, and now rest in its afterglow. I should come up with a catchier name for it, as even its acronym P8JP is clunky to say. Anyway, this refers to the fact that once we leave the 8th jhana, all sorts of options may be open to the meditator that weren't open in the same way before. As the Shamatha First fans will point out, the standard Pali Canon texts will say things along the lines of, the meditator left the 8th jhana, turned the mind to seeing with wisdom, and attained to awakening. Such statements refer to investigating your experience in the afterglow of the 8th jhana. There are many options for skilled and properly attained practitioners in the P8JP, which is like standing in the grand central terminal of high states and stages, or like being in a room with many open doors lining the walls that you just have to step through. I will talk about more of these later, but just keep it in mind, as a version of this will show up in the next chapter on the stages of insight. Even a few seconds in the 8th jhana produces this P8JP option enhancement effect.